and welcome to episode 44 of the Naked Eye podcast. This is Nathan Oxenfeld coming to you today in September 2020. And in today's episode, I'm very excited to be joined by Jay Brown, who is a world-renowned yoga teacher based in Pennsylvania, but also has a presence online with the community that he's built and his awesome podcast called Yoga Talks. That's actually how he and I originally got connected. One of my YouTube subscribers sent me an email last year saying, hey, you should check out Jay Brown. You should be on his podcast, Yoga Talks. And lo and behold, I got connected with Jay. He had me on his show. We had an awesome time together. And I had such a good time. I wanted to kind of return the favor and invite him to be a guest on my podcast. And with our shared backgrounds in yoga, plus our common interest in the Bates method and natural vision improvement, our conversation just really takes us deep into both of these topics and really explores where they intersect and where they overlap, which is something that really happened for me personally when I was going through my vision improvement process originally, was just noticing how much yoga and the Bates method have in common. So we discussed lots of different topics like the effect that glasses have on us and giving us more of a fixed focus. We talk about this difference between power and control, how it relates to our eyes and our vision. We discuss the power of beliefs and how vision improvement really depends on questioning authority and sometimes even questioning science in a sense. So he and I both kind of discuss some of the challenges in kind of wrestling with that and just finding a balance with applying these alternative approaches to our eye health with our modern lives and with the 21st century. So I'm really excited for you to listen in on our conversation. But first, I just wanted to let you know about one major update in regards to our documentary, Vision 2020, From Eyesight to Insight. Really happy to announce that it is going to be coming out very soon. And we're actually planning on doing a worldwide premiere on Thursday, October 8th, which is World Sight Day. So we figured it would be an appropriate day to release this groundbreaking film all about natural vision improvement. So you may have heard me talk about this on the podcast or on my YouTube channel, or maybe you've seen the trailer that we've put out, or maybe you've even donated to our GoFundMe page to help fund the project, or maybe this is your first time hearing about it. So if you want to be one of the very first people to see this film, definitely mark down Thursday, October 8th in your calendar, because we're going to be probably streaming it on YouTube for free that evening at 6 p.m. Eastern US time. But that's not all we're doing that day. We're actually setting up an all-day holistic vision summit. So starting at 12 o'clock, there's going to be 4 speakers leading up to the premiere of the film, including myself and some of my colleagues like Esther Joy Vanderwerf, Dr. Jacob Lieberman, and Barry Alcatel. So the several hours leading up to the film, you actually get a chance to attend these awesome talks from natural vision experts from around the world. And then we'll be doing our watch party, followed with a Q&A with the creators, myself and Barry. You can head over to my website, integraleyesight.com, and you'll see links to the 2020 Holistic Vision Summit. So you can go ahead and get signed up so that not only you'll get access to the live events on the 8th, but you'll also be given access to the replays and the recordings for that weekend. And then there will be an option to maintain like lifetime access to all the replays as well as the film too after that weekend. So that's really the main big announcement I wanted to share with you today. And beyond that, there's even lots of other exciting things going on as well. But you can find information about all these things at my website, integraleyesight.com. But for now, I really hope you enjoy today's episode. And once you finish it, you can rest assured that there are many, many more talks like this available on Jay Brown's podcast called Yoga Talks. So definitely check out his show, subscribe to his podcast, and just keep an eye on what he's working on, because he's an incredible teacher. So without further ado, I'd like to invite you to join the conversation with me and Jay Brown on the intersection of yoga and the Bates method. Welcome, Jay, to the Naked Eye podcast. Really excited to have you here with me today, exactly 9 months after I had the honor of being interviewed on your podcast, Yoga Talks. So I'm really excited to share you with my audience and introduce you to them as well. And they've just gotten a little bit of an intro from me at the start, but do you want to go ahead and start off by just letting us know who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation 9 months ago. And as we can discuss, it's had resonance and reverberations in my life since. So I was like, great. I was like happy to get your email and get the invitation. So I'm super happy to be here. And in terms of who I am, I always, whenever we get the bio question, I guess, I have been doing this one particular approach to yoga practice for probably the last 2 decades. For your listeners, if they know the yoga world, it's largely inspired by this one teacher named TKB Desikachar. And it's a therapeutic orientation, kind of a gentle yoga approach. And I was somebody who grew up in the New York yoga scene in the early days of like the vinyasa craze, when things were still on their upswing in the industry and yoga was becoming like mainstream. When I first got to it, it still had a little bit of that hippie touch, like I got to yoga because I wanted to know inner peace, and there wasn't any internet yet. And so that did change over the years, and so I kind of rode that wave of the yoga coming from underground to mainstream. Mm-hmm. And started out just being a teacher. I taught for like about better part of 10 years. And then I opened a center myself in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, which I had for 10 years, which I let go of 3 years ago when I moved my wife and 2 children to Pennsylvania, about an hour and 45 minutes away from the city, which we talked about because you have roots in Pennsylvania too, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah. Outside of Philly.
So, nowadays I kind of, 3 years ago when I let go of the center and moved, I transitioned like a bunch of what I do online. I have a podcast, as you know, you were on the show, and moved a lot of teaching I was doing online. Mm-hmm. Maybe about 50%, 60% of what I was doing got transitioned online, which I wouldn't have known how important that would become given everything that's happened in the last 6 months with the pandemic. But I had already kind of set myself up some on that. I mean, of course, I had all this in-person teaching that I was still doing that now is all still up in the air.
Right.
But back to your question, I started in yoga at a time when it still had sort of like a kind of a mystical thing to it. And I've always been a very pragmatic guy. I'm not like kind of prone to like magical thinking necessarily. I tend to be pretty skeptical. But I had transformative experiences through yoga that just like I could deny. Yeah. And I became like, like a true believer. And I've been teaching it for so long, and I've seen other people have similar transformations through using simple breathing and moving exercises and different ways of thinking and seeing about things. And so it's something I'm passionate about. And I think with the podcast, I really just kind of tumbled into that. Mm-hmm. I had a blog for a lot of years, and then ultimately started the podcast because I just felt like there was a bunch of bull about yoga teachers out there. Like nobody was getting a real honest picture of what like the yoga teacher's life was really like. There was always like Instagramification of let me show you my best self doing my best pose and put it in a filter and give it like an inspirational quote. And I was like, man, I'm talking to my friends who are yoga teachers, and they're struggling, and the industry is not on the uptick anymore; it's on the downtick. And I just started the podcast because I wanted to talk about stuff, and ultimately it took off. It kind of grew a lot in the last 5 years, and so that's been a lot of what I do. But other than that, hanging out, being a dad and a husband, and trying to get through this whole crazy situation we find ourselves in.
I hear you too. I'm really grateful on my end of like making the transition to more some online work and doing this work, virtually, starting like 5 years ago. It's kind of an example, like you pointed out, of your podcast being one example of how yoga can really go beyond just the physical and really being the actual class part of it to actually, getting into the conversations and the philosophy and the concepts and all that stuff. And like you just said, this kind of transparency and authenticity is like, it really shines through in the way that you open up your shows and just kind of, just being real with people and being just like vulnerable and honest and open with this stuff. I think that, I know in my yoga teacher training, that word authenticity was like super, super emphasized. We really got to come from that authentic place. So I appreciate that you embody that as well.
Well, I try, and I think I appreciate what you're saying in terms of it being a yoga, because I think of it that way. Like just even right now, you and me just trying to have a conversation and connecting to one another is like a yoga. And I do think of the reason I adopted this kind of radical transparency in the podcast is I just felt like I wanted to be honest, and that the way that I learn and other people learn is like modeling, like just people trying to be honest and do the right thing and be, forthright. that is the model I wanted to put out into the world. So I think of that as a yoga is the point of that. It's like it's a practice. It's like a meditation or something.
Yeah. And a real quick little side note just around vision, fascinating connection with honesty is I was kind of blown away when I was first learning about some of the Bates method stuff and how our vision is really tied to our mental state, kind of what's going on in our mind. Because Dr. Bates did these interesting experiments where he would actually measure people's vision and their refractive errors when they were telling the truth versus when they were telling a lie. And people's refractive errors tended to actually increase. So their vision got worse when they were saying a lie. And it either kind of came back to the baseline or even got a little better when they told the truth. So it's, these little kids that he was doing these experiments on with noticing the lies and truth, like they were like, oh my gosh, this is like a lie detector test, And just a quick little thing there of like why I'm totally with you on how important that honesty is. Because when I learned that little thing of Bates showing this honesty versus dishonesty thing affecting our vision, I was just like reeling back in my memories of like in childhood or growing up, like things I lied about to other people or lied about to myself about. And it's just maybe not something that everybody thinks there's a direct link to that with the eyes too. So,
I mean, it makes sense to me that it all is affected. And I'm sure there's a lot of different reasons why our eyes are affected, but certainly like satya as a primary practice in yoga, I don't even think of that as something as I have to follow or anything. I just think of that as if I want to feel okay and be the person I want to be, then I would embrace that as a practice, And I think it's interesting what you say, that we don't often think of our bodies in that way. It's like what we talked about when you came on my show, where there's an idea about the body where it's like a postural, structural, biomechanical thing, where I had this idea about the Bates method of like, oh, you do eye exercises and you strengthen the muscles in your eyes, and then that's what makes your eyesight better. Or you have another vision of the human body that's what they might call a biopsychosocial model of the human body, or sometimes they'll even say biopsychosocial spiritual. They'll add the spiritual on, where you're looking at it in a different way, like you're describing, where actually if you lie, your eyes don't see as good, like it's and that it's taking into like all the multidimensional factors of a person, not just like the physiology of you as though you're just like a chemistry or something, and you're not also emotions and a soul or whatever.
Yeah. I do want to kind of touch on that a little bit more moving forward in terms of how, I just get from you of that full spectrum approach here of like, taking it all into account. And I try and emulate that as well in the vision work, as well as like not just the eyes, but the mind, the body, the soul, the spirit, all these different connections there. But before we go further, I did want to kind of backtrack, and you mentioned that you and some of your students have, experienced certain transformational sort of things, and I wasn't sure if you had any quick little examples of like any personal experiences, examples of that, or things that you've seen other people benefit from, specifically like this more kind of gentle approach and breath oriented approach to yoga.
I mean, in terms of transformative experiences, I think the biggest thing, it depends on what you're talking about. I mean, I just wrote this blog recently that was called, "Is Trusting My Intuition Delusional?" Because right now, in the midst of everything that's going on, there's like this high premium placed on science, even though science doesn't always seem to have clear answers. And I guess what I was writing about is that a lot of times, whether it was addressing pain in my body,
Mm-hmm.
or whether it was like making a hard choice about what I'm going to do with myself and my life, or who I'm going to be, in those moments, it wasn't like empirical data that I was able to base my decision on. That I had to be able to go inside myself and hear a voice of knowing from which to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And that a lot of what I do is trying to cultivate an ability to feel like you know how to do that. And that when I've done that, I feel like I operate from this place of truth, and I feel like I know who I am, and I have this sense of purpose. And that, as like a basic idea, is what transformed my experience of life from being a real, like, not joyful experience, which had to do with my mom dying when I was young, and like unprocessed grief,
Mm-hmm.
and even just being sensitive to like how messed up everything. I've always, from like a young kid, I always felt like I was really sensitive to like the injustice of everything around in our societies and stuff. I was always a little bit of like, I think that's why I got into yoga. I was like kind of punk rock, and then kind of got into yoga because I didn't want to hurt myself, but it was always a counterculture move. There's that larger transformation of like how I see things, like how I see myself. But there's other experiences which you and I kind of talked about. Like there was a period of time where I was really deep into like sadhana, where I was living a somewhat ascetic life for myself. And I did have all these experiences. I saw colors and auras, and I had these experiences that I couldn't deny. And I don't often talk about those because people will think you're crazy and weird and stuff. And I don't necessarily teach about those things either.
Right.
But those experiences have absolutely kind of imprinted in me a sense of how life has, for lack of other words, forces at work in it. And that I actually have come to understand those as like benign, nurturing forces, and that there's a natural progression to things, and there's a certain comfort in a way that comes. And when I wrote that article about intuition and being delusional, when I say that to someone who's really, really science-minded, I'm crazy and potentially convincing people to not listen to the CDC or wear masks, because I'm saying you can trust your intuition to make decisions, which I'm not saying anybody should not wear masks. I'm just saying that I trust in my intuition more than sometimes the institutions, frankly. And I just think that life is inherently kind of magical on some level, even though I'm not, and that doesn't mean to discount science,
Right.
but there's a whole bunch of stuff that science can't explain. And, you know, this is maybe taking us in a different direction and we don't have to go. But one of my biggest epiphanies after I talk to you, and this is whenever I say to anybody, like I mentioned the Bates method or this conversation I had with Nathan Oxenfeld on my show, I say the same thing, that one thing you told me about how like the human eye doesn't have a fixed focus, that when I wear glasses, I'm looking through a fixed lens.
Yeah.
That was just huge for me. Like, even now, I was telling you right before we started, right after we talked, I was really starting to do some exploration. And most of it was just like going for walks without my glasses in the woods.
Yeah.
That was basically it.
Yeah.
And I was having all these experiences, and then like life took hold, and then this whole pandemic thing happened, and like my screen time doubled, and like I slacked horribly. And my eyes were really starting to get worse. And I was like, I'm having trouble seeing, and this is not cool. My body is telling me something.
Mm-hmm.
So I started like 2 weeks ago, like I said, I got your email. I started doing them again. And when I first went out, it's so obvious that like, if I'm looking close, I can see pretty good actually. But if I'm looking far, which is what my prescription's for, like my eyes will freak. The first one I did after a long while, they freaked out. And I was just like tearing, and like they just aren't accustomed to trying to look at something far away. They just haven't been doing it for however many years. But already in the last 2 weeks, I took 4 walks. I did one right before. It's funny, we had to push this later, but then the appointment happened and I had this time. So I went and took the walk. And even after just 2 or 3 already, that had changed.
Yeah.
So I'm mentioning all that because it really just to reinforce like whoever your listeners are, like just that one conversation with you. And some of those ideas really did have pretty big impact on me. And it goes to your question about, it is this big picture thing. Like it is like you're a whole being, and your eyes are like integral to your perception, as you told me when you came on my show. So
that's awesome. That's kind of how it started with me too, was just going on walks without my glasses, just walking my dog without glasses. I mean, I still had them with me just in case, I needed them. But like, I realized that before I learned about the bait stuff, I hadn't spent more than probably 10 or 20 minutes without any kind of correction on my face. And most people, when they first take them off, and maybe in your experience too, is like that freak out feeling, right? It's like the eyes just don't know what to do. And so there's such an urge to just slap the glasses back on. But if you can like hold off and just do that walk and just kind of push through, like,
I just let him tear. I was like, "Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I'm sorry." I just let him tear. I thought it was like really cleansing. I felt like that's what it felt like. It was like my eyes were cleansing. I don't know. I thought it was good, but it was a trip. It's a trip.
Yeah. And it's like, it's pretty amazing how quickly things can start to adapt to not having the glasses on. And it might just be a temporary thing at first, but when you, get more regular with these walks and just take the glasses off more in general, it just like interesting things really start happening.
Well, I would say, as I mentioned to you, frankly, there's 2 aspects to it. Like one of them is this, just this, like we're talking about exploring my eyes and not having lenses on them. But there was also this other stuff, and I mentioned this on my show when you came on, because I had this big mole on my face, and there's like all this deep-seated insecurity around that. And it became really clear when I started exploring taking the glasses off. I became really conscious of that mole, which I never think about, because I think the glasses kind of obscure it. And because I am like a public persona of sorts, and like my face is like out there as like whatever, like a performer or whatever, I'm now like even coming to do this, I almost considered not wearing my glasses. I was like, oh, is he using the video? I don't know if he's using the video. I was like, decided to wear them because I just wanted to feel comfortable.
Yeah, totally.
But I'm just really aware of that. And, who knows, at some point, maybe I would be able to tackle that. But it's like, I recognize that as like a deep-seated thing in me.
Totally.
And I say it out loud to you here and on my show because I realize at some point I really want to see if I can look into that more. And maybe.
And that totally is, I mean, that's definitely the way to do it is just, like we started off with on this topic of honesty, right? Just being like, this is why I don't want to take them off. It's like you're being really real with that and just letting that be known, not just to me, but to listeners. And one thing that I did to kind of work around this a little bit, you could even consider it yourself, maybe even other people listening, is when I first took my glasses off, I felt naked. I felt vulnerable. I felt like since I couldn't see off in the distance, like I didn't know what was like coming for me or whatever. Like, and it was just this like appearance thing too, because I was just so used to having them on my face. People were used to seeing me with them. So I got these non-prescription, they're called like fashion glasses. They're just like, they're just plastic. And so I would put them on. They're pretty dirty right now because I don't really wear them, but I would put them on, and it just gave me that kind of like, like I've got something on my face. It wasn't necessarily that I was like hiding behind them, but it was just like that comfortable, familiar feeling. And I wasn't getting that lenses. Fixed state from the prescription lenses, but I still felt like this kind of psychological, like safety of just like having eye protection, and also I didn't look that different. I mean, these were a different style, but you can get them in any kind of style or whatever.
I mean, that is an interesting idea. I have like another set. I could just put some other clear lenses without prescription in there.
Yeah, or just pop them out so there actually isn't any lens at all.
But that would be funny. And that would actually be good for video because you wouldn't get the glare and stuff. But people might notice, why is he wearing glasses with no lenses on there? That's funny. But a good idea. It's a good idea. I mean, again, it seems kind of silly. I think for me, at some point, I'll just be bold and like not wear it and see what happens. You know, I like to take it on, but I appreciate that idea. That's interesting as like a middle ground, a middle measure or something. Yeah,
I mean, it's almost like even getting into the territory of like placebo effect. Right. Because, and I actually did a little experiment. One of my buddies came to Asheville. He's been interested in learning this vision stuff for years, but he was going through medical school and it just like, he didn't have too much time for it. So he finally graduated. He's like, I'm going to come and spend 4 days in Asheville. We're going to do like a vision retreat together. And he spent the full 4 days, no glasses. And we went out camping, we were hiking, getting out in nature. You know, he was getting these like clear flashes in a short time. And we came back to the house and I was like, all right, it's been 4 days, no glasses. I'm going to give you, I didn't give him his glasses back. I have a bunch of weaker glasses here for people to try out to see like what they would want to kind of drop down to for their training glasses. So I was like, here, try these weaker glasses. I didn't tell him what they were. And I actually gave him these that had no prescription in them. And he put them on expecting them to have prescription in them. And he was like, oh my gosh, like the leaves are so much clearer now. Like, and it was no prescription.
Nice.
And I told him, I was like, that was just a test. You know, that was just a blank lens there. And like, he was kind of blown away by that. But then I actually gave him the weaker actual prescription lenses and they felt pretty good. I mean, he started at like -6, -7, and he was wearing like -3s and -4s and felt like he had dropped down several diopters in just 4 days. You know, just really focusing on every day, you know, for all day long, essentially. But I'm really curious about this intuition piece because, you know, it's fresh on your mind. And it was actually one of the things that I wanted to talk about with you today with your experience in yoga. And one of the things that I like that lines up with yoga and the vision work is the chakra system, and specifically the sixth chakra, the third eye chakra, which one of many attributes of that aspect is our intuition, right? It's not just our physical vision, but it's our inner vision and our intuition. So I guess I just kind of wanted to like pick your brain a little bit or see if you have anything that you like want to share around this third eye topic, or, you know, any kind of overlap between that and like more of our physical eyesight kind of stuff.
I mean, I think it's been on my mind a lot because, and actually vision is a perfect example, because there's an existing conventional system or science that is the established norm or reality or something. And there are reasonable questions to be asked about it. Like when you came on my show, you didn't say no one should ever wear glasses. They're horrible. But the way that we do it, the way that we use glasses and the way that the protocols, the standardized protocols that have been developed around addressing people's eyesight or whatever, they go against certain, I don't know how to say it, like intuitive experiences of ourselves and our bodies. Like the Western medicine, I just had someone on my show, his name is Timothy McCall, and he was a doctor for 10 years. And then he decided to stop practicing medicine and dedicate his life to yoga therapy. Mm-hmm. And I was asking him why, you know? And he was basically saying that when you take like a holistic model of a human and you put it through the lens of like a double-blind placebo scientific lens, mm-hmm. you end up having to standardize a protocol for something that doesn't standardize. So you end up actually studying what he called a third-rate imitation of yoga therapy, not what people actually do. That right. There's an initial leap that happens that actually that if you could just study outcomes, like if it doesn't matter whether it's, they like want to know, is it the triangle pose or is it the Nadi Shodhana that made the depression go away? And he said, there's like this saying, if you can't count it, it doesn't count. But like what you're saying and what he was saying is, like, does it really matter? Like if the outcome is the depression goes away, doesn't matter what the protocols are. Can we just study the outcomes? So the idea is that my intuition tells me, and it was somewhat spurred, I had already had some interest in the Bates method, as I told you, but then we had our conversation. My intuition tells me that from what I've learned about the body, when I go to see my eye doctor, he is speaking to me from a viewpoint that I don't think I totally agree with. Like, it's not like I want to discount him, but I have to choose. I have to choose. Am I going to rely upon the established science when they hand me the menu of which lens I'm going to use or whatever? Like, and if I have enough money, I can get the lens that will help me see far and near. Or if I don't, I have to choose which one or whatever, like that is, you know, or is it okay to question that, you know, and not be a crazy loon?
Yeah.
And you can take it out farther, like even anti-vax. Like I had this guy on the show where, like, there are some people who've had children who've gotten autism and they believe it's because it's a vaccination and they're pissed about it and they're anti-vaxxers. And you know what? If that happened to my kid, I might be an anti-vaxxer too. I also have children who've been vaccinated and they didn't get autism.
Right. Yeah.
But I also altered the schedule. I mean, I think it's reasonable to question whether there needs to be aluminum in the vaccines or whether we need to give so many vaccines all at once when they're so young. Like, I think there's reasonable questions to be asked, and it doesn't mean that I don't believe in vaccines. So I've just been really interested because to really embrace what I understand to be Bates' method, you have to be willing to depart from a conventional way of thinking. You have to be willing to trust that you have the power, which you do, which everybody knows that you do. And it seems to me the same thing that I'm doing, that you're doing. These techniques are really about facilitating someone understanding that and knowing that. And that you actually do have the power to affect your vision without corrective lenses, just through like experiential engagement or something.
Yeah. And I love that word you chose, because that's actually been coming up recently with some of my students as well, is power. And I feel like when we have an issue with our vision, when things are blurry, we're having difficulty seeing things near or far, there's a sense of loss of power. And especially when we start to use the prescription lenses to help us see, then we're giving even more of our power away to the glasses or the contacts or the establishment. Like you said, it's like, okay, I'm gonna give my vision over to you so you can take care of it for me, so I don't have to think about it. and this is all, you know, pretty unconscious, subconscious stuff. It's not like people are like, you know, it just not that many people know about the Bates stuff, and it's just like not common knowledge. So if more people knew about it, then maybe there would be a different outcome. But
even still, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you still have to challenge the way people think about their bodies and life. Even if they heard about it, they might just think it's crazy woo-woo.
Yeah. Yeah. It does definitely challenge. It certainly challenged my pre-existing beliefs around my eyes and my vision. And it sounds like I was very much on the same path as you, where I used to be very skeptical about most things. I was very materialistic, reductionist. And same thing, I had certain unexplainable experiences that just could not fit into that paradigm. And so it really did open me up to more of these, you know, other possibilities and potential new beliefs. So I totally agree with you. Everybody who goes through the vision improvement process has to, before they even like do any practices or training, it's like we have to shift those beliefs and understandings. And it kind of reminds me of like the yamas and the niyamas as sort of the foundation on the 8 limbs of yoga, of like, even before we get into our asanas and our poses and our stretches and the physical stuff. And we got to kind of take a look at how we're treating ourselves, how we're treating others, how we're living, how we're acting, and what we're believing and things. And a lot of people skip over that stuff and just go right into the physical stuff. And I think it's kind of the same with debates of like, well, even if I'm still kind of on the fence about it, I'm going to try these eye exercises, but in the back of my mind, I'm still full of doubt and skepticism. And who knows, maybe that could hold us back in a sense of, not getting the full results. But the reason I was intrigued by your use of the word power also was because at the vision conference I went to in Germany last fall, actually the month after I was on your show, one of the teachers there who was presenting pretty much attributed most vision problems to be sourced from the third chakra, the solar plexus, which is kind of our power center. And I thought that was interesting because it was kind of, like I said before, I usually associate the sixth chakra, the third eye chakra, with vision imbalances or lack of intuition or things like this, visualization. But it was really nice to kind of sink down from this area and really feel like, oh, maybe my level of power or lack of power also has something to do with my eyes and my vision too.
Oh, I think that's really interesting because when you were talking about, first of all, you used the word reductionist, which I think is the right word to say out loud again, because that is sort of like the other direction. But when you were talking about power and you were talking about using the lenses, the word that came into my mind was the word control. And that actually there's a very big difference between like control and power. And so like solar plexus and like this feeling of fortitude and power from deep within, like when that's like maybe not as strong or free flowing or whatever language you would want to use in us, then the response to that would be to try to like control, like, and in a fear, like you want to control it. So the lenses are a way for us to control our vision in a way, which is actually does detract potentially from power. You know what I mean? So in a way, that's why I do think I think powerful is the right word, even if you don't think of it as like, I have powerful, even if it's just the idea of, if you were someone like me and you who did adopt corrective lenses without any real inquiry or consideration about it, just because that was the way it is, that exploring that is fundamentally powerful. It just is.
Oh, yeah. And I think, like I said, when we have blur, we don't maybe feel as connected with that power. And I know that when I was experiencing clearer and clearer vision coming from within myself, I just felt more and more confident, more and more powerful, and like the transformation you felt from yoga too, of just like experiencing more joy and fulfillment and purpose. And it's interesting you brought up the word control, because at that same workshop where they were talking about the solar plexus, they also brought up control as being one of the sort of underlying, I guess, more sort of esoteric or metaphysical explanation of floaters, like the little floaters in your eyes.
Yeah.
And I just found this account on Instagram where they were putting up some vision tips and things like that. And yesterday they put a post up about floaters and like some foods that you can eat, like kiwis and different kinds of fruits and stuff that potentially could, provide some vitamin C and other things that could help with the floaters. And I saw just somebody put a comment under that saying like, hey, I took this advice and my floaters are essentially gone now. And I feel like I have so much more energy now. Right. And it's like when we have floaters or blur or any kind of vision problem, I feel like it kind of not only takes our power away, but it kind of, it's like saps our vital energy from us in a sense. Cause so much of our, our eyes and our brain are consuming so much of our energy in our body. And if there's something off with that, then it's almost like working in overdrive in a sense. And it's like exhausting. And it's kind of exciting to think about how we can kind of free that up and tap into that energy and that power, and not only just in our eyes, but like through the whole system and what that might show up in life.
I think that's true. And even back to your initial pointing to like yamas and niyamas, I think that one of the fundamental precepts of the yoga that I embrace is that you are like inherently whole, and your body does have its inherent ability to heal and be well, or even to have a fulfilling life even with difficulty.
Yeah.
And I've had all these like pain science guys on there, and even when you talk to the really honest pain science guys, and they deal with people who have chronic pain,
Mm-hmm.
at some point it goes mystical, and they have to admit it, because it's about perception and suffering.
Yeah.
It's not just a like it's interwoven. When you're saying, like, you can't separate them out. It's all one part and parcel.
I really appreciate that contribution of like, we're not just, using yoga or the Bates method or any kind of approach to just like reach this like ideal place where we never feel stress, we never feel pain, and we hear about that in yoga, like we're striving towards enlightenment and
Not me.
samadhi.
That's a bogus. That's a myth. I know some people have that viewpoint. I talk about this on my show all the time, because there's like all these different philosophical viewpoints in yoga. Some people are like, have an idea of like a transcendental enlightenment.
Yeah.
But other people don't. So I'm sorry, I have to jump in, because I don't subscribe to that notion. Like, I have a more tantric viewpoint, which is about integration. So it's just like, can I feel okay? Can I feel okay enough to enjoy the fact that I'm here?
Yeah, and I mean that's why I wanted to just kind of second what you said, because I felt a relief even just hearing you say it just a moment ago, of like being okay with having difficulties, or learning how to find that peace and that calm even when we're experiencing intense pain or suffering. It's like it stresses me out to think that I can only feel those good things once the pain is gone, or the depression is gone, or whatever. It's like, no, it's like, this is where we're at, and this is what we're, accepting, and allowing this stuff to be here and be a part of the experience. I think maybe others listening also felt a little sense of relief there too.
I mean, it was a big epiphany for me. I think for a long time, I had this idea that healthy meant I was going to feel great all the time or something. And that ultimately that was just not that's not a healthy, I have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that in fact, healthy involves a full spectrum of experience, even like experiences I don't like. Like, it's very healthy for me to have pain and feel sadness, and like my life is more whole and complete. And so even though those are not favorable experiences that I want to have, having them is healthy, and I'm more healthy for having them. And to kind of embrace those things and not make an enemy of my experience and try to control it all the time, but try to understand it and try to, move through life with the best possible, experience I can.
Yeah, exactly. And just to make the connection here directly with the vision, this applies to blur too. It's like you just said, perfect health is not necessarily feeling great all the time and just 100% all day long. And maybe same thing applies to vision. Perfect vision maybe doesn't necessarily mean having perfect vision all the time. We have these fluctuations, we can learn from them. We don't have to have this enemy in the blur. We can kind of embrace the blur when it does show up and learn from it and understand it's part of our experience. And sure, we can have that ideal where we're shooting for more stable clarity and natural, clear vision. But maybe people can feel that sense of relief about their eyes too, of like, hey, maybe just because I still have a little bit of blur, or I'm experiencing some high eye pressure, or I'm, starting to develop a cataract, or whatever it is, maybe I can still feel this relaxation and this peace and this calm where I'm at right now, before I even get to that point of clearer vision or, reduced pressure or whatever it is. We're doing it right now. We're changing beliefs. We're changing perspectives on how we're thinking about this stuff.
Hopefully. I mean, I would also say one thing, and it goes back to even our consideration of intuition, or one of the things that the reasons I'm interested and passionate about yoga is that I certainly have discovered that it is possible with practice to learn how to go inside yourself and feel okay. regardless of external circumstances, like with your eyes closed. Like it is, regardless of your vision, or even whatever else, or even how much pain you have. And I work with people with chronic pain, really bad chronic pains of all different sorts, who live with more pain than most people do.
Yeah.
And their pain gets lessened simply by embracing the notion that they can go inside and feel okay. Simply believing, and that's actually scientific fact. They've got actual scientific studies that show if you believe that this thing is going to help me, it's this much more likely to than if you believe it's not going to. So if someone believes that it's possible, that I'm not just a machine, I'm more than a machine, and I can go inside myself and I can feel okay because I am a function of life. I have breath coming in and out, and I have a heart beating, just like there's a sun in the sky. I'm a function of nature, and because of that, I am inherently okay on some level. And that is my philosophical viewpoint.
Yeah.
But the other cool thing about that I will say about belief, and this is something I got from a wonderful teacher who I would point your listeners to as well. Her name's Amy Matthews. And for a long time, she was a movement educator. She studied body-mind centering and the bond and all this other stuff. And nowadays, she actually just teaches people how to hold their babies. She's like a total Yoda. But her whole thing was that your idea about your body changes your body. And that absolutely has been proven true for me. Like even where like I had an idea about holding my spine straight as being like optimal. And I did that for years because I believed that that was the case. And in fact, I ended up undoing curve in my body and creating pain because of an idea that I had. And as soon as I let go of that idea and I was like, actually, it's okay to let my shoulders roll forward. It's actually where my spine has more curves, even though it doesn't look like whatever. It's healthier for my spine to have curves. I don't know why I'm trying to make it straight all the time. That idea, just changing that idea, helped the pain go away because I now have more curve in my spine because I'm not trying to make it straight all the time. So your idea about whatever it is absolutely changes your physiology. So we have to believe that your body is capable of functioning and being okay. And if you can believe that, then you have made it that much more true.
I love that. It's a perfect example of just how it starts on the non-physical level and it really shows up on the physical level. And you know, I really encourage people to explore that bridge there, that link between these two levels, and really understanding the power of the mind, that, you know, and the power of ideas and thoughts, and how that intention can really make measurable changes.
It can. And what I would say is, you know, right now in the yoga world, again, I was mentioning there's like a lot of times where we had these authority figures who were, you know, the gurus, and then a lot of them have fallen from grace. There's been a lot of scandals, and a lot of like these traditions have kind of crumbled. And a lot of people have been looking to science as the more of the authority, like biomechanics and polyvagal theory, and trying to find like scientific ways of kind of like lending credibility. So, you know, like I have a little voice of alarm in my head when I hear us having this conversation and we're talking about, you know, our ability to just go inside and change our perspectives. That, like, again, that is like a somewhat subversive viewpoint, frankly. And we're on sketchy ground in some people's eyes because we are questioning certain science on some level. We're not discounting it, but we're questioning it. And I mean, again, I'm careful about that. I think for me really is about what I'm asserting or promising. Like I can't promise, like I don't, like it's a person's own individual inquiry that would make any of this happen. And I think as long as we're not asserting like I've got some answer or some solution, like I know how to cure your vision.
Right.
But it's more like, hey, if a lot of people have benefited from this technique, and if you try it, it might work for you, which there's a big difference there.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. And I'm really grateful with my experience of going through my yoga teacher training prior to my Bates method training. and sort of getting the lesson from Swami Satchidananda, who was sort of the guru at Yogaville Satchidananda Ashram, very, very clear that he is not the guru. He said over and over and over again that, I'm a mirror, the guru is within you. I'm not fixing you. I'm not helping you. You're helping yourself. This is the protocol. These are the steps. Might work, might not. And I feel like I really carried that with me over into the vision work of reminding pretty much everybody who I have a consultation with, just let them know, like, hey, I don't fix your vision. You do it yourself. It worked for me. It's worked for a lot of other people, and these are the steps you can try and, be open to your own individual experience with it. Cause I think as long as we have that, I'm here to fix you, then it's inevitable that there is going to be that fall from grace.
I think so. I think you're right. And I think it only works, when that comes from within that person. I mean, even like you were saying earlier, like the techniques, and I've even talked to like a bunch of different people, like people who work more clinically too, that like the techniques alone often aren't as effective. Like they might give some benefit, but when there's relationship and there's like interpersonal interaction between people and ideas, like we're talking about together today, that the techniques work better.
Yeah.
Always. So I think we can kind of go at it from both ways. I've had people who weren't so open to ideas at first, but just did breathing and moving exercises and felt better and didn't know why. I'll give you a lovely story example. Like before all the pandemic happened, I've been doing these classes in Allentown, Pennsylvania. I got this space in there. It's this terrible neighborhood. It's like really bad neighborhood, but that's because it was so cheap. That's where I could get a space. So getting like students to come in person has been kind of rough, but I ended up having a couple of regular students. One of them was a retired construction worker. He just has no experience with yoga at all. So it's not like I'm talking yamas and yamas with him or like non-dual philosophy or anything. He's a construction worker. He's a great guy though, really honest, open guy. And he came up to me, I don't know how many months into practicing. And he said, I want to share with you something that I noticed that I believe is because of our practice. And I said, please do. He said, for a long time, I've had this problem where like I can't sleep in the middle of the night and I go and I make myself a sandwich and it's not good because I'm overweight. And he said, so last night for the first time, instead of making a sandwich, I did some of that square breathing that you taught me instead. And I went back to sleep and I didn't eat a sandwich. And I really appreciate that. And I just thought, wow. And then after that, he would come in with questions about stuff, pretty big, deep questions. And then it's like, so we started physical there.
Yeah.
And he had an experience and he's like, okay, this is interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the interest to other things. And then other people come in and I just mention to them that they're already whole and they don't need to push hard on their bodies. And they're like, what? And then like, so I think you could go at it from either direction. They are intertwined, but they go together. It can't just be techniques, it has to be experience and exchange and ideas as well. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think I was probably more like him in my experience of my yoga experience started very physical and then it kind of naturally, organically kind of took me deeper and deeper into the other stuff. I imagine maybe that's how it is for a lot of people. Either way, it kind of leads us hopefully to the same inner place. And I love how you're talking about kind of going within and feeling comfortable there and being with yourself. That showed up with one of my students this month. He kind of had this epiphany that I'm not at home in my eyes, and I haven't been at home in my eyes for a long time. He kind of had this picture pop into his head that it was like an abandoned house, cobwebs everywhere, misuse, floorboards breaking. It's like, wow, this house is in disrepair because I just haven't been home. Nobody's been taking care of it. And so we finished up the session with him like, you know what, I'm going to move back into my eyes and start cleaning up the cobwebs and fixing it up and really feel like that's my safe. I'm going to decorate the walls. It's going to be perfect. That's my space. That's my home and being within. And maybe it's not your eyes, maybe it's another part of your body that's been kind of abandoned or kind of alienated in some way. And so I love what you're talking about of, we already are all whole, and how do we kind of tap into that? And several times today you've brought up the breath and this kind of different approach or this different style. And so I definitely didn't want to let you go today without just asking you about this whole gentle approach, because it may seem, I know when I think of like massage, a lot of people are like, give me the deep tissue, and like sometimes we do need that. But one discovery I made along the way, whether it was with my eyes or my body or yoga, was like this whole thing of subtlety and gentle touch or gentle movement or easy breath. So yeah, do you want to just kind of speak on that a little bit, or how that's shown up for you, or how you share it with other people?
Sure. I mean, I did study other approaches before landing on what I do now. And I think people use like the actual physical practice of asana and of yoga for like different purposes. And I think sometimes those are more fitness oriented. Like people are thinking of the poses as a way to build strength and flexibility. There's debates as to like how you do that, like how to build strength and flexibility within that, even though like more functional strength and stability, and other people coming from a more like fitness where if you don't push harder, you won't get stronger. Like there's different even ideas, even though you might still be looking at it from a fitness perspective. And I certainly worked in that way for some while, but ultimately what I became most interested in is the contemplative aspects of practice. And that's a kind of a broad term, but the way that Desa Kachar, who is a teacher who I want to cite by name, because that is where this is coming from, teaches that essentially you use these breathing and moving practices for very specific purposes, and that you use it to develop sustained attention, like your ability to put your attention on something, keep it there for as long as you want, and then release it at will, as like a basic muscle that you would have, an attention muscle, if you will. So you practice the ability of drawing your attention inwards to breath, and breath is always first. They even teach techniques about how to regulate your breath and increase your facility with breath as well. But it basically means you bring your attention and breath together, and then you engage your body to that, so that the actual activity is attention, breath, and body together, all as one thing right now. And you do it with movements or positions. And it is essentially an exercise of being able to develop that attention and sustain it. And then once you are more rooted in that, and you can actually do that with some facility, it is to then develop what is called sthira sukha, which is one of the only things written about asana in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. And sthira sukha means, sthira is a strength. It's often associated with your exhale coming from below, like this rooting from below, strength, exhale, sthira. Sukha is your inhale. It's the receptivity, the receiving of your breath. And it is the balance of sthira sukha, of a balanced effort, an easeful strength that you're looking to cultivate. And to me, like that translates out in all kinds of ways, in the way that I'm trying to communicate with you now, in the way that I walk down the street, in the way that I make business decisions, like this engaging with a strength that is also receiving, where I can have an opinion, but I can also be open to being wrong. Or it's a qualitative state that you would gain more facility in recognizing and being able to like operate and feel in. And then it translates out, like the most clean example I can always give people is tree pose practice, where you stand on one leg. Because people have this idea about that pose that like it's about being able to stand on one leg, and whether or not you have good balance, like whether or not you're like a balanced person is whether or not you can stand on one leg. But I know lots of people who can stand on one leg without falling over for as long as they want, and they're still a complete wreck. They're not balanced at all. And then I know other people who can't stand on one leg at all, and they're living wonderfully balanced lives.
Yeah.
So actually, for me, tree pose practice is about cultivating a mental frame so that regardless of whatever has been going on in my day, right now, when I go to stand on one leg, and this is what I tell everyone, if I fall over, I can smile or chuckle about it like it's no big deal. I can create a mental frame where I am able to have enough space that I can choose how I wish to respond rather than falling over and reacting and being, ah! And I can practice that. And if I can do it consistently every time I go to tree pose, regardless of how crappy my day was, in that moment, I can summon a mental frame where I'm able to choose how I wish to respond rather than react. That becomes something I know how to do. So when my 5-year-old is pissing me off and I'm about to lose it and haul off and hit her or something, I have a little space there where I get to decide and say, no, actually, that's not the dad I want to be. So to me, what I find most transformative and powerful, to use the words that we've been using about breathing and moving practices, is its ability to facilitate that kind of awareness in ourselves and facility with how we communicate and engage and relate. And frankly, to your question, when the practice is really overwhelmingly challenging on a physical level, there's just not a lot of room for that. Like, in order to get to that kind of subtlety, it needed to be simpler and slower for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, there needed to be more room to notice what my experience was while it was happening.
Yeah.
And so the practices that Jessica Chart teach are like that. They're breath-centered. They're simple. Inhale, arms up. Exhale, arms down. It's not about intricate positions. It's just about like an experience that you give yourself that affects the overall equation, like a spice that you put into the stew that then changes the flavor of the stew. And if you do it consistently, you can actually steer what the flavor of the stew is going to be. You don't have complete control because there's all these other things that are putting stuff in that stew too, and you don't have control over that. You only have control over what you're putting into the stew.
Yeah.
But having awareness and being conscious about what you're choosing to put into the stew of your experience does mean that you get to have some say. The last thing I'd say about this, there's a wonderful metaphor for this in the yoga tradition. They talk about the tomato plant and how if you don't have control over what the weather does. So some years you might have an abundant crop of tomatoes and some years you won't. But it is absolutely an undeniable fact that if you don't tend to your garden, like if you don't tend to the tomato plant, you will get less tomatoes. Mm-hmm. That's a fact. So you just tend to it, and then often you end up getting a lot more tomatoes. And to me, like, that's a fancy way of trying to point to like what I think is most interesting about yoga practice, which is someone's ability to utilize simple breathing and moving exercises to gain awareness and understanding in themselves that they can have clear perception and make good choices about how they want to be and who they want to be.
I love that. Not only does that all sound very delicious with the stews and the tomatoes, but it's very profound too. I think maybe in the past, and maybe some people can relate to this, of feeling like when something is on the simpler side, sometimes we discount it or feel like, how could I possibly get something out of that? Or how could that make such a big change in my life? And it's kind of similar with the Bates method. A lot of the Bates practices are quite simple, just palming. Actually, that's more of a, has roots in yoga as well.
It does.
These really simple little things like blinking and shifting. And it's like, I remember I had those thoughts of like, how could this possibly do anything? Or with the breath, I'm breathing all day long anyway. What do I need to do? What is this going to do for me? And it's just so amazing how paradoxical it can be and how profound we can extract these pretty powerful things from pretty subtle experiences or subtle energy or however we want to play with that. But that was a wonderful description of this whole kind of approach you're taking. And it just sounds really up my alley in terms of my approach to yoga. I remember I actually didn't do a whole ton of research into integral yoga before I went to do my teacher training in integral yoga. It was just one of the only residential programs that was available at that time, like to go live at the ashram for a month, and as opposed to doing like weekend trainings at a studio. And I was so pleased when I got there and saw that the whole integral yoga approach is so much more gentle, and it's not about the power yoga. It's more about, the traditional.
And they do the eye rolls. They do the eye rolls, right? That's the one. When you told me about the connection between Aurobindo and Bates method, I was like, oh my God, the eye rolls. Of course.
Yeah.
I did some practice in that tradition too. Ironically enough, when I went to that tradition, I was in my young, kind of messed up days, and I just thought it was boring. They did too many shavasanas between everything. That gentle stuff was too boring and lazy. I wanted to kick ass and do the Ashtanga and do the hardcore stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think, again, I've talked about this with many yoga teachers. I do think that your sensibility and what you need in life at different times draws different things to you.
Yes.
But when it is about what we're talking about, like these subtle things that they certainly have a physicality, but there's deep roots into our selves, simpler is often way more effective.
And who knows, maybe you and I both had to have that experience of pushing and the harder version, and to kind of get to the more nuanced level. Maybe people don't just fall right into the very subtle nature of it. And
it's true, although I like to think sometimes I can save people some trouble. But I know what you mean.
Yeah, well, and that's what I was going to say. Like, that's why you're here, right? Is to be like, hey, like maybe you can try this instead, and maybe get here sooner or whatever. But like we talked about earlier, everybody's got to have their own journey with this and their own experience and come to these conclusions on their own. But it definitely helps to have some voices out in the atmosphere saying like, hey, this is a different way to do it too. Especially
when it's an unconventional voice, honestly. Like I was saying before, I hate to keep bringing that up because it feels like I'm not being positive, but it's a reality when you embrace alternative methods, for lack of another word.
Yeah.
That you do kind of come up against that, so that it requires a certain fortitude or something, a belief.
Mm-hmm. Or a vision. You've got this vision of the world or the future, that, like I'm not just going to fall prey to this other person's vision or their view. I've got my own belief and my own vision of what it looks like. And I was recently on somebody else's podcast about leadership. It's actually called Heartship. So it's like leading from the heart. And we talked about that, of how like pretty much all leaders, whether you're a leader in an alternative field or, any kind of leader really, you have to have that vision, this clear vision of like the future or life or whatever it is. And
it's interesting. It's usually, sorry to interrupt, but I use the word vision, and I would use the word purpose, which I guess you could kind of interchange them. Like that there's a sense of like, yes, this is the right thing for me to do, and this is the right direction to go. And then yes, there's a vision of what that is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't always like the idea of like, because that goes to that feeling of I don't have answers, and I don't always know. I don't have a clear picture of where I'm getting, but right. I know the direction that feels the right way to go.
Well, and that might touch on whether we're a more visual person or a more kinesthetic person or a more auditory person, or because I was talking to one of my friends recently about moving to a new place or kind of starting a new chapter, and because I shared with her, I had this really clear vision of this house I wanted to get in the mountains that had a view of the mountains, and I was going to set up my studio here, and I was like visualizing what the rooms would look like, and because I'm kind of more of a visual person, and she was like, I remember you telling me that, and I kind of have a feeling of what I'm going to be doing in 10 years or whatever, but I just don't see it. I don't have the picture of it, and I think you just kind of touched on that a little bit. Even if there's not a sharp developed image in your brain, there could be maybe something else drawing you towards that, or maybe it's more of a feeling or a thought or whatever it is. And like I think that is a hang up, because I hear that a lot from people of like a big part of the Bates method is about visualizing, using your imagination and memory, things with your eyes closed. And a lot of people feel like that they struggle with that, or they close their eyes and they don't see anything. And in that case, I have people do more kind of other sensory visualizations. So, what's your favorite food?
Yeah, what I would jump in to say is that like visualizing doesn't, in my experience, have to be like a fixed image in a way. Like one of the things they teach in Desikachar teachings is that the result of yoga, or one of the purposes of yoga, is to help you find a direction in life, and then to go in that direction with continuity. So the vision could be me going in the way I need to go in life. Like, even if you don't have exactly the details
right
of what your job is, and while you're going through your life being who you need to be, you can envision that you are doing that. And then I will do that. And then do it, which is what the yoga is.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree with you that it shouldn't be this kind of fixed thing. And like we were talking about towards the beginning of like, our vision naturally isn't a fixed focus. It's a fluid thing, and it's changing all the time. And so I don't think our visualization should be that way either. I feel like it should be an evolving kind of image or visualization.
Nice. See, fixing your vision is like wearing corrective lenses. How about that? That was nice, man. That was good.
Yeah. And on the actual imagery component of the visualization, I feel like sometimes, at least in my experience of teaching people this, is like they'll try and visualize too much or too big of a scene, like a whole beach scene or, some nature scene. And it's almost like too much to keep track of. And so if people are struggling with it, just, I like to encourage people to really simplify it and take Jay's advice of not having it be this static image, but have it be a dynamic thing, and maybe just one element from a scene. If you're picturing a beach, maybe it's not the whole sand and ocean and waves and boats and people and birds and everything. It's like, maybe it's just one seashell.
You know what? I could give you a really good example because I just got off the phone with my wife. She's at my in-laws' place. And frankly, like, I don't know, in the last year, my wife has done, I don't know, more like inner work with herself than I've seen her do in like the 14 years I've been with her. Not that she was messed up, but like, she had stuff come up for her in her 40s as our kids are getting older, and she realized how much she sacrificed of her art and everything. So she's going through this major life stuff. And a lot of it, she's been working with a therapist, just like tied to her dad. And so they went to visit her. And she has been like kind of, I think, envisioning her having a conversation with her dad that she needs to have. And then she had it. She did it. So it was huge. I just got off the phone with her. She just did it. But it was like, I don't think if she hadn't prepared, if she hadn't spent that time, like you said, visualizing her she didn't even plan out what she was going to say. She didn't do that. She just envisioned herself talking to him and feeling confident and not crying and saying what she needed to say, even though she wasn't even envisioning what she was saying. She was just envisioning herself feeling confident enough and together enough to say what she needed to say to him. And then she ended up, and she said, I cried a little bit, but it was fine. It worked. Like she managed to execute. And that's cool. And that's kind of what you're saying, is it was her using her mind to move her in the direction she needed to go or do something that she needed to do. And she didn't have a fixed image of exactly what she was going to say, and she didn't plan it all out, but she envisioned the conditions that she needed in order to do what she needed to do. And I sometimes think that's been helpful for me too, to not, like you say, have to know all the specific details of where I'm going to be in 10 years because I have no idea. There's certainly envisioning I can do that's still helping me move forward the way I want to or need to.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Just, I get from that just a lot more wiggle room, a lot more freedom and flexibility to really embody what we're talking about, this kind of visualization thing, whether it's regarding your eyesight or your vision, or it's a decision you have to make, or, an important phone call you need to do, or whatever it is. Like, it's really valuable. And I feel like, especially if it's something that causes stress or there's some fear attached to it, we might kind of avoid, like, oh, I don't want to think about that. It makes me uncomfortable. And it sounds like she did a really good job of kind of ramping up for that and leading to a pretty nice outcome.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm inspired by her.
Well, I'm inspired by you. I've been inspired by this talk. And I want to really direct people to your show because there are just countless other versions of this in terms of like so many topics and amazing talks and conversations you have with amazing people, and continuing for people to get to know you and your, passion with this. And you're a super smart guy, really, I can really tell that you live this path, and it really just shines through, not just in the yoga practice, but like in your life in general. And they're essentially the same thing as we talked about. So we're, I want people to check out Yoga Talks podcast, but is there anything else that, people should know about, like website, or I know you have some like online trainings and courses and stuff, or
I've got a bunch of stuff. I've got like online live stream classes. I've got like a teacher's call. Like if people want to like get into conversations like this, on demand stuff, everything is at jbrownyoga.com. So they can find all that stuff there. And I would just say to you, I have like an internal joy meter that goes off when I engage people who are also like into honest inquiry into themselves in life. Like, so I've just so thoroughly enjoyed our exchange. I enjoyed having you on my show, and I've enjoyed being here on yours. And I'm happy to know you and think of you as a friend, and, let's be in touch.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, hopefully once the pandemic is a little more settled and I feel a little more comfortable traveling around, maybe I'll end up back up in Pennsylvania sometime. And
I would like that. And, I've been saying this and it's risky, but I mean, I'm just been having all these conversations with my fellow yoga teachers because, we're kind of moving back into the yellow here in Pennsylvania and reopening. And there's all these questions. Are we doing classes? Are we wearing a mask while we do the classes? And, I'm certainly saying, hey, we got to err on the side of caution. I agree. But at some point, I will hug people again.
Yes.
I've decided, even if there's still risk, I'm not accepting that I won't hug people again. So, at some point, I would like to give you a hug if you're cool with it. I know we're guys or whatever, but like, I like that we've made this connection on the internet, but it would be cool to be in the same room with you sometime. So I look forward to that.
I look forward to it too. And yeah, I would love to come check out your space up there. And you're always welcome here in Asheville. So
very cool, man.
All right. Well, thanks again so much, Jay. And we'll talk again soon.
All right, man. Take care.